Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this morning on this webinar on occupational stress and injury in the COVID-19 era and beyond. My name is Jagjit Virdi and I'm a solicitor at Mills & Reeve, and I will be chairing this expert panel discussion today on the very topic of occupational stress. I want to kickstart by formally introducing you to our expert star-studded panel who have been kind enough to give up their time today. We have Professor Neil Greenberg, who's a consultant academic, occupational and forensic psychiatrist based at King's College in London. He also chairs the Royal College of Psychiatrists Special Interest Group in Occupational Psychiatry. We also have joining us Professor Anne Harris, who is the president of the Society of Occupational Medicine. She started her teaching career as a lecturer practitioner in occupational health and then course director at the Royal College of Nursing before moving that program to London South Bank University. We also have Alistair Dornan. He is Director of Organisational Wellbeing within Gallagher Insurance Brokers. And prior to Gallagher's, Alistair spent 4 years as a non-executive director of the International Stress Management Association and 5 years as a project board director of the World Economic Forum's Working Towards Wellness Global Initiative. Finally, you have myself. I'm a solicitor that specialises in the defence of occupational stress claims, and I've been practising for almost 14 years now. And I'm based at Mills & Reeve's offices in Birmingham, and I sit within their casualty team. Now, before kickstarting the panel discussion and passing on to the panel, I just wanted to begin by giving a bit of background as to why I personally believe there's likely to be an increased number of cases in relation to occupational stress linked to the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, suffice to say, the past 10 months have been pretty miserable. And I think that would be, to put it mildly and politely, there's been many ups and downs, more downs and ups perhaps. And many of us for the first time have probably been experiencing strain to our mental health for the first time and our general well-being. Many of those with pre-existing issues have probably experienced an aggravation of symptoms. And no matter what sector of the economy that you are working within, you would have felt some form of impact. The more obvious cases we see on a daily basis are those working on the front line within the NHS, within intensive care units up and down the country, our doctors and nurses who are treating our sick patients who are suffering from severe symptoms of coronavirus. Some of the harrowing stories that you hear on a daily basis and what they're facing is really concerning. The less so obvious cases, perhaps those within the office sectors such as ourselves. We're social beings, we like being around people, we're used to that sort of lifestyle. So for the past 10 months, we are now working remotely, working from home, and perhaps with our own challenges, such as childcare, caring responsibilities for elderly relatives, fear of the virus, the economy, what will this mean to our job prospects and what the world's going to look like once we are eventually out of this lockdown and pandemic. So overall, there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and it's undoubtedly having an impact on our mental well-being. Some may say, well, Jag, this is purely circumstantial. Where's the evidence to suggest there's a link between the pandemic and an increase in numbers of cases concerning occupational stress? I just want to take a moment to share with you some interesting statistics from the HSC. Since 2017, the HSC recorded around 526,000 workers were suffering with work-related stress, anxiety, and depression, and that was, as a result, causing ill health, unable for them to work. Since that year, occupational stress, anxiety, and depression has become the largest factor for work-related ill health. Prior to that, it was musculoskeletal disorders, and all the years prior to that. Now, since 2017, there has been a steady increase in the numbers of cases. Towards the end of 2019, the HSC published their figures once more and recorded the figures had increased to around 602,000 workers suffering with occupational stress, anxiety, and depression. At the end of 2020, so we're around about 8 months into the pandemic, that number has jumped up staggeringly up to 828,000. And that's the largest increase ever seen since the HSC have published their reports. Now, again, occupational stress, anxiety, depression is the largest contributing factor towards work-related mental health. And I believe that we are at a critical crossroads at the moment where there's no signs of this, well, we are in a lockdown, and there's no signs that when we're coming out of lockdown, and this is affecting, again, our mental well-being. So I do think we're at a critical juncture now where employees are in a position where they can offer assistance and help to their workforce to help manage the effects of this pandemic and any issues with regard to occupational stress. And a message that I want to just kind of emphasize at this early point is prevention is better than cure. Now, we are going to offer some advice and general tips to employers as to what steps they can be taken if they haven't already done so to help their workforce and prevent such cases of stress becoming so severe they turn into more serious conditions, and that leads to long-term employee sickness. So that's where I believe we are in relation to occupational stress, and I'm now going to take us to our expert panel, but I think a good start would be to go to Professor Greenberg to first ask him if he could perhaps describe to us and define the difference between stress and other what we refer to mental illnesses, and what's the distinction, because often they can be mixed or they can be confused. So Neil, could I perhaps ask you to kickstart this discussion and just give us an explanation?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for inviting me to speak. It's great to have this opportunity. So I think it's often best to try and think of stress and mental health and pressure and normality along the spectrum. So many of us day to day have small niggles, we think about things, we have a few anxieties. None of that makes us abnormal. And 80%, that's 80% of us have symptoms every day. You then move, as you get slightly more going on, into an area of pressure. And pressure is something that many of us, again, experience.
Yeah.
In fact, it's most motivating. As that begins to build, it gets to a certain point where there's a curve, which is called the Yerke-Dodson's curve. And you go over the top of this curve.
Yeah.
You start, instead of performing better, you start to perform less well. There's too much going on. You can't think clearly. And that's when you've reached stress. And stress isn't ideal because you want to keep people in a pressured environment and not over the curve of stress. And obviously, if stress goes on for a considerable period of time, then we get to people actually developing mental ill health. So you can think along that sort of spectrum, with pressure being good and desirable for some periods, stress not desirable, and certainly mental ill health not a good thing.
Thank you for that. I mean, controversial statements I'm about to make. I don't think stress is necessarily a bad thing when managed, because often some people require stress to operate and function to the best of their abilities. But I do find when stress is not properly managed, that's where it becomes a problem and leads on to more serious mental health conditions, as you explained.
Yeah, I think 20 years ago I'd agree with you, but I think the definition now has been set by the Health and Safety Executive that says that stress is bad. Pressure can be good, or but when you have too much pressure or too many excessive demands, you get stress. So I think that if we use the language that actually keeping people under a degree of pressure is a good thing at times, not too long, I think stress is something to be avoided, because that's getting to the point where you're not functioning very well. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now, I think a good start would be to go to your recent study that I read the other day on the effect of the first lockdown on our frontline workers. Could you just share with our guests and viewers today that study and what you found? So I read a bit about it in the BBC.
It came out last Wednesday in Occupational Medicine. So basically, this was a study of 709 intensive care workers who were in 9 hospitals who were performing their duties, saving lives in June and July last year. We used a range of validated measures. So these don't make diagnoses; they give indications of symptoms. And it was anonymous, so that encouraged people to tell us the truth. We found that 45% of them, that's a huge proportion, reported symptoms suggestive of either probable PTSD, severe depression, severe anxiety, or problem drinking. And those rates are really high. We found up to 40% had symptoms suggestive of PTSD. We're not suggesting for a moment that all those people will have a clinical diagnosis and need treatment. But what these data show is that these staff, unsurprisingly, were having a lot of symptoms. And the important thing is twofold. One is their mental health is being affected, and that's not good for them. The second thing is we want them to do a good job. And of course, as lawyers, you may well get involved when people are claimed not to have done the right job. And at that level of symptoms, there's a good proportion who are likely to be functionally impaired. And therefore, that's a patient quality issue as well as it is a health issue.
Yeah. So what would you say can be done in these circumstances? Because we've never seen anything like this before. There's no textbook to tell us what to do. How do we cope in a pandemic? And, just focusing on frontline workers at the moment, they've got no option but to, perform the duties to the best of their ability. So what support can they be provided to help them through the situation?
Well, I think that the lessons for frontline workers are actually the same no matter what organisation you go into. Obviously, some are more important, but the principles are the same. First of all, better that you can support your team to be supportive internally, the better the outcome is for everyone else. So there's really good evidence that shop floor supervisors, so that in this case will be the sort of the team leader, nurse, the consultant leading the team, but in an industry or occupational point of view, it will be the junior manager, the person who's leading the particular task, that they have to be able to feel confident to speak about mental health with their staff. And so when a non-confident manager says, how are you doing? And I'm fine, they go, well, that's great. But of course, fine can mean absolutely anything.
Yes.
And so we need the managers to feel confident to get beyond that and to have a meaningful conversation. It can be a brief one about mental health and about well-being. Yeah. And actually, when someone in a frontline role says, I'm feeling absolutely terrible, I've got no idea how to use this machine, there's not enough time, the manager actually can go, well, actually, if you can't use the machine, let's mentor you, buddy you up with someone who can, because then that will reduce your stress. So intervention isn't a mental health intervention, it's getting to do the job better. Yeah. So though getting the supervisor to support and have proper conversations, having the team mutually supporting each other, so formally buddying people up, saying, well, Sandra, Peter, I want you, as well as doing your work, to look out for each other. And then particularly in these frontline roles, we need them to do what's called reflective practice. And basically that means an opportunity to speak about the emotional impact of what's happened, not what went right, what went wrong. Because people who are doing these really difficult tasks, and again, this works just as well in industry, they often feel guilty or that they've done something wrong or that they've been let down by their bosses. And it's easy to set up an idea where you're really angry or shameful or guilty and you don't speak about it because it just festers. The best way is to get that out in the open, to realize that actually everyone was doing their part. It's the situation that's incredibly difficult and it's not someone's fault or my fault. And that prevents what we call moral injuries, people having psychological difficulties because of what they think has gone wrong or down the line. So those three things, but reflective practice, good supervisors and good peer support will make a difference right now to protect the team's mental health.
Excellent. So in a nutshell, an open and transparent working environment, you would say, encourage that from top going to, and then down to the bottom.
Yes, but it is about timing. So for instance, I talked about these reflective practice sessions. It's important to talk about it. You don't want to be speaking about the emotional impact of it when you're on task. You want people focused, get that job done. When you go to have your 15-minute break or before you're going home, that's the time to go, gosh, what was that all about? But it's important not to get the timing of these things right. Yeah,
thank you for that, Neil. Can I go to Alistair? Just going to a different sector altogether, away from frontline workers. Alistair, for those that don't know, you work within Gallagher's. It's a global organisation. How have you, as a business, handled the pandemic in relation to employee wellbeing? Could you share with us your experiences, your challenges, and how you've overcome those?
And look, first up, thanks for the opportunity. And Neil, I must congratulate you on your paper. I was able to read that tail end of last week. Fascinating insights. And, not surprising to hear the level and the degree of the challenge that a lot of people have got. But Jag, you're asking about what have we done to meet the challenge? And it's for Gallagher, as you mentioned, multinational business, but also for our clients, here in the UK and abroad. It's at this point really simple. Three things for me. First, we've focused on support. What support can we get out to our people right now? We have a load of tools. Our clients on the whole, and most organizations dialing into this today, I'm sure you will have a range of employee support programs in place, whether those are full employee assistance programs or occupational health or whatever. What we've really focused on is how do you drive that connection through to people so they know where to go for support, so they're signposted. The second, and actually I should say on that one, we for a number of our, particularly internally, we worked over a weekend in March last year to shift a lot of our support that was classroom-based training, particularly for line managers, to be available virtually. And I'm so pleased we put that time and effort in, because we've now been able to support not just our own colleagues, but clients as well. Thousands of line managers in particular, in helping them deal with these challenges. And Neil, I do want to reference, I think, your interesting point about the importance of line managers and tools as we talk through. Second piece for me, Jag, has been we've ramped up communication. We're not going to take away everybody's problems. We're not going to be able to take away their anxiety, but you know what? We can control how we're communicating with our people. And I'd advise anybody to just ramp up the communication. That being said, we've got to be careful, Jag, how we do that. For a lot of organizations, I noticed the chief executive stepped in and she took control of the communication, or he took control of that communication. And actually, that's a great thing to do. We want our leaders to be present. However, we can't ignore the importance of the line manager in that, and we can't absolve the business from responsibility of that. And third, we moved as quickly as we possibly could to what I'm calling kind of business as usual at an unusual time. We've got to get on with getting on, and whether those are exceptional, challenging circumstances like Neil referenced in ICU, or whether it's working with our clients doing what we do, we've got to get on with that. And that was then breaking down. Have our people got the right equipment? Have we given them the right strategy? Do they know what we're looking to do? Are we supporting them in the execution of their roles? And how do we continue to drive innovation? But 2 points, maybe a third point for me as well on that. One, when it comes to employee mental health, right now, keep away from fads. I see loads of organizations, pitching to me on a daily, weekly basis with the latest idea. Keep away from fads, stick to the basics. Do the basics well. Second, and I'm sure, Jag, you'll be, this will resonate with you, meet your legislative responsibility. Have a look at the HSE. I'm interested in Anne and Neil's view on that, but you've got HSE, make it clear, you've got to conduct a risk assessment, you've got to have a stress audit in place, and you've got to have an action plan. It's an own goal from an organizational risk management perspective not to have addressed those. And third, Neil, to your point, my own view over many years, and those years are advancing now faster than I'd like to admit, but line managers, the number one area to support your people is train, adapt, and adopt the capability of your line managers.
Thanks, Alistair. I just want to pick up a couple of points, because a few of my personal bugbears, when eventually these cases reach my desk when they've gone terribly wrong and the relationship has broken down between the employee and employer, a claim is made, and I'm there left to review a file. And some of the things deeply resonate with me is training line managers. The amount of times I find line managers haven't been trained to manage, because it's a different skill in itself. Often, we're climbing the ladder of progression. We're great at our jobs. I'm a great lawyer. You're a great accountant. Whatever you are, doesn't necessarily make you a great line manager. And that's not to be critical, because it's not natural to many people. You have to learn the skills required, empathy. You also have to know the internal policies and procedures of the organization and what HR say you can and cannot do. So I deeply resonate. I can relate to that point, Alistair. And also, just a final point, just before I go to Anne, risk assessments. The amount of clients over the years I've advised on that haven't conducted risk assessments when it comes to work-related stress. In the past, I would say they've probably gotten away with it because there are other hurdles to overcome in succeeding on a claim for occupational stress. But I think society has changed a lot over the last 5 years. Especially since the Stevenson Farmer Review back in 2017. You see more organizations employing wellbeing officers, so they're taking a firm grip on wellbeing and recognizing that open discussions need to be had. I no longer believe organizations can get away with not having risk assessments in place. And the risk assessment shouldn't be just a tick box exercise, we've looked at it, let's move on. You have to actually properly assess the workplace. What are the risks regarding mental health? And you have to review that regularly and implement any changes. And when there's something like a pandemic, I would say you need to review that regularly, I would say, to be showing best practice.
Jag, if I may just on that, I think you're absolutely right. It's almost, I'm not going to say scandalous, but it is frightening the number of organizations that just do not appreciate that legislative responsibility. And it's the first thing that, well-meaning lawyers like yourself ask in a claim is, where's your risk assessment? Where's your stress policy? And most people don't have them. You're right, it doesn't take long to do that. And when we're looking at what's been the fastest shift in workplace practices since the Second World War, I couldn't think of a better time for organizations to address that.
Again, I'm sorry, I'm going to quickly just make this final point. We are at a crossroads here, in my view, because with what's happened in the pandemic, mental health is in the spotlight, rightly so. The courts will be looking at these claims in different, eventually when court claims are made, they are going to be looking at these claims in different light. And I would say you need to be having risk assessments carried out with regards to mental health and occupational stress. So that's just the kind of point I want to emphasize. Now, Anne, if I can go to you, I think you are mute, so I'll ask what I want to ask first.
Thank you. I'm really...
Can I just ask you on occupational health, Anne? Could you perhaps explain to our viewers what is occupational health? Because there's many people out there don't quite understand occupational health, or maybe a bit cynical over occupational health. Could you enlighten us in that respect?
Yeah. Okay, so the role of an occupational health service is to actually add value to the organisation. So we can help you with advice on things like risk management. We can look at, I'm going to focus now on hazards that people might be exposed to in the workplace. So until the pandemic reared its ugly head, where mental health really came into focus, before that, managers and others were more than happy to talk about physical issues in the workplace or exposure to chemicals, but mental health was something that they were uncomfortable with. So part of occupational health approaches would be to do exactly what you were saying about undertaking risk assessments. And there's a requirement under the Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure the health, safety and welfare of the employees and others that might be affected by what they do. Plus, there is a requirement under the management regs, Regulation 3, to undertake those risk assessments. In the past, a manager of a department might be very happy to look at the chemicals that people work with, vibrating tools, noise, but they forget the stress side, the psychological health, and psychological health is just as important. So I would underline what you've just said about risk management. I'd also underline what has been mentioned already about having employers with managers who are aware of mental health and aware of the effect of work on the health and safety and welfare of their employees. So I would work as an occupational health advisor, supporting them in that respect. I could write a dissertation on the role of the OH service, which I won't, but I could support them in relation to the mental health issues. I could support the managers to be aware of mental health and what issues that they could look at as part of their risk management strategies and what control measures they could put in place. And I can't remember if it was you or Alistair was saying about managers may not be aware of all the policies that the organisation has that supports them in their role. So it could be things like dignity at work policies, equality and diversity, substance misuse, those kind of things.
And since this pandemic started, have you seen a significant uptake in occupational health services?
That's a very good question, because I'm not in practice at the coalface. I can only talk about my friends who are, and talking to a friend this last weekend, the workload in her department in the NHS has just been phenomenal.
Right.
So I can only say secondhand knowledge, yes.
Right. Okay. And what are the challenges do you think that, coming from occupational health, employers are going to face with, employee well-being out of this pandemic? I mean, what are the common things you would expect to see?
Well, first of all, somebody who is being stressed to breaking point, they're just going to crack and they're going to go off sick. That if the ones that aren't quite at that stage, their performance is going to decline.
Yeah.
There's going to be an increase in human error. And thinking about what Neil was mentioning about ITU staff, what is worrying is the impact on their mental health of seeing people die, one after the other, being expected to look after maybe 4 patients, 5 patients, when in the past they'd only have had 1 patient.
Yeah.
That could then lead to the post-traumatic stress that he's already referred to. And if you are tired because they're working long hours under this increased pressure, it's easy to make errors.
Yeah.
And when you make an error from a professional point of view, you feel terrible about it. If somebody dies, there's an issue that that person should not have died, but it was your error. And then there's the legal issues about what are they going to do now? Are they going to report me to, for me, it would be the Nursing and Midwifery Council. For a doctor, it would be to the General Medical Council. So there's all sorts of issues that would be going on in that person's head, which isn't going to help their mental health.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Anne. I mean, beginning in my introduction, I did reference the HSE statistics, the rise in cases concerning occupational stress, anxiety, depression. Have you seen that steady increase over the past 4 or 5 years as well? Is that something that you can relate to generally?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think part of it is because people are more liable to talk about their mental health than they were in the past. So in the past, if somebody is just feeling far too stressed that they can't cope at work, it's easier and more socially acceptable just to ring in and say, I've got back pain. And that might be a reason why the musculoskeletal figures are going down and the mental health issues are going up. It's not that they weren't there before, it's just that people are talking about it. I don't know what Neil would say to that. Neil?
So I mean, I think I would agree with you. I mean, I think there's the situation at the moment is incredibly difficult, no matter what people are doing. I don't think there's necessarily any easy answers. I'd go back to what I said earlier, and I think what Alistair said as well, is that I think that in the big round of all these different things that we're talking about here, that empowering supervisors to be able to look after staff is probably the most important. But alongside that, what I would also say is that we also need to make sure that supervisors themselves are reasonably well supported, because we place a lot of pressure on them. And in fact, we're just starting off a piece of research sort of looking at that too, because we're asking a lot of them.
Neil, can I jump in there, Jag, on that? Neil, excellent point. And Anne, I was listening with real intense to the point you were making too. Line managers, really important that we support them. They are at the front line in an organization context in terms of overcoming stigma. And we haven't mentioned that yet, but actually that's a real problem for organizations. They particularly, there's a number of people I think who are throwing questions from certainly from in the care and healthcare sector. That out indexes almost every industry. You ask people how they're feeling, they kind of get on with it, and they get on with it until they can't get on with it any longer. And providing line managers with the ability to diffuse that conversation, to have an open discussion with people, really important. But then you've also got to remember that they need support too, and providing them with capability, capacity, mechanisms that they can then manage their people more effectively is a real important step.
I think I'd also, sorry, Nick, can I go in first, Neil?
Absolutely, Anne, yeah.
Thank you. I would refer managers to the HSE because they've got standards which are really helpful, looking at stress management standards, looking at things like the demands of the job, how much control the employees have got over their job, what support they're getting. And that links back to what we were saying. I believe firmly that many managers are saying, well, we've got mental health first aiders, we've increased those, that's really great. My argument would be that's one approach, but I think it's better to train your managers in mental health and those standards from the HSE than just be very reactive and say, well, we've got first aiders, job done, because that is only part of it.
That would go back to my opening point, prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely.
Neil, did you want to make that point?
Yeah, actually, it fits very well what Anne just said. So great study done in Australia a couple of years ago with fire station managers. So obviously firefighters routinely get involved in trauma. They did a randomized controlled trial, which was a really high quality trial. Some of the managers in one arm got some training about how to have a psychologically savvy conversation with their staff, talk about mental health. The others didn't. They had their outcome measure as sickness absence. They measured it 6 months before the trial, 6 months afterwards. For every pound invested, it was an Australian study, but published in the British Journal. So every pound invested, it saved £10 in sickness absence over the following 6 months. And the key thing was increasing their confidence, the supervisor's confidence to have those conversations. We've done some work with the NHS and we've developed a 1 hour remote training package done by Zoom. 1 hour is bite-sized, it'd be great to do more. But that 1 hour had a bit of didactic training, it had a bit of a demonstration, and then we got people into rooms and we got them practicing these skills using a template, how to have these conversations. We followed them up 1 month afterwards, and before the course, over half of them were not confident in supporting their colleagues. 1 month later, 85% were supported. So small amounts of input, not a lot, can really help you have those meaningful conversations that leads to better productivity and better mental health.
Thanks for that, Neil. I think I'm just looking at the time, and Control Centre's telling me that we've come to the end of our 30 minutes and we've got some questions from the audience. So if I could pass it to my colleague in Control Centre, Harriet Strevens, who's got some questions.
Thank you very much, Jag. I'm going to start with Professor Greenberg, if I may. Question that's been logged is, are there any medical studies that suggest a certain age group may be more vulnerable than another when it comes to stress and well-being? And if that's the case, do we need to take this into account when managing employees?
Yes, so I mean, there's been studies done before COVID and actually during COVID monitoring mental health. Great study, it's called the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Study. It's a really high quality interview-based study done every 7 years. Data's all published, APMS 2014. So younger people, particularly young women, are more likely to report significant mental health problems. That's been found also in the during COVID, that they have probably been the hardest hit. And actually that fits very well with our NHS work, because actually sort of 18 to sort of 25, 30 is actually a large proportion of the workforce there as well. And also certainly during COVID, we find that people with the dependent children, but probably dependent adults as well, are also harder hit. And I think most importantly during COVID for healthcare, but also elsewhere, is people who have been redeployed to do difficult tasks that they're not used to. So being dragged in to work in an ICU when that's not normally the case, or being put on to work on a responsible project outside of hospitals when you're not used to doing it. So not feeling properly prepared for your role was also a really important point. Now, all those things are something that managers can do about. You should know who it is who's being dragged in to do this difficult task. So they need better monitoring, better support, and ideally good mentoring to bring them up to a good level of confidence, because that will improve their mental health.
Thank you for that, Neil. You broke up slightly when you gave us the title of that study. Could you give us the title again?
So it's the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Study. So it's a bit of a mouthful.
Thank you.
APMS.
Thank you very much indeed. Alistair, I wonder, may I ask you, how can you make employees engage in work-related wellbeing programs? One organisation that's posted a question says that they often find within the organisation a lack of interest and uptake to wellbeing initiatives.
Gosh, well, I mean, certainly you can't force people. That's the first point. So, that's not an uncommon challenge. I think people do have a fatigue of programs that come out. Certainly when I'm working with organizations and offering our guidance and what we do well and sharing best practice, some common themes for me are, have you got the strategy right? So many organizations kick off with just initiatives, and we'll do more initiatives, and that one didn't work, so we'll try something else. We did a walking week, or a love your colon month, or mung beans, gym membership and lentils. The reality is, if it's not part of if it's not linked to your strategy and you're not crystal clear with your people, they won't engage with it, they won't buy into it. Second point for me is around communication. So are you then communicating the benefits, the value, the creativity, the expectations? And important with communication is your people get it when they get it. So you've got to use a load of different media, a load of different approaches. And actually, I think Neil's point is spot on as well. You've got to understand your demographic. I had a wonderful study. It was actually won some awards with a tech firm, and we were able to. The reason it was successful is we took their broader initiatives, broke them down into really relevant personas that reflected their population. So early careerists, graduates, leaders moving into role, senior female employees, managing families, real complex piece of work, and then micro communicated to those audiences. And we saw upticks in engagement by sort of 30-35%. So I could go on for hours, but I think it's, look, you've got to have your strategy, you've got to start out with your ambition, and you've got to be crystal clear with your communication to people.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. So I think your answer to the question that follows that, which is, have you seen any positive changes in wellbeing programs within organisations, and is it worth the investment and resource, is a resounding yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Anne, if I may, a question for you, please. What benefits will referral to occupational health have compared to sending an employee to his GP for a letter confirming his medical condition?
Oh, that's a very good question. Occupational health are experts in the workplace, and they can make recommendations as to how that person can be supported in the workplace. The diagnosis is not the important thing. It's understanding how that diagnosis impacts on the person's health, safety and welfare in the workplace. So the GP has their role providing a treatment service, but the occupational health service can be much more proactive and give recommendations to management how that person can be supported to stay at work and to be productive at work.
Thank you. So what are the qualifications of occupational health professionals who will conduct the employee assessment to determine whether they're fit for work or not?
Another interesting question. Unfortunately, there is no standard requirement to have a qualified occupational health person. Anybody can call themselves an occupational health advisor, and that's one of my particular Bs. So from a nursing perspective, I would want somebody who has got a qualification in general nursing or even mental health nursing. I was the first course director in the country to encourage mental health nurses to train as occupational health nurses. My colleagues thought I was, in other institutions, thought I was absolutely mad. But in fact, it's paid dividends because they found certain areas of their training more challenging, but anything to do with mental health, well, they were on a roll. So the kind of person I would be looking for is, if I was recruiting somebody to a team, would be somebody with experience as a general nurse plus a specialist qualification, and there are some which are recognised by the NMC and some which are just as good, if not even better, than some that are not recognised by the NMC. So a qualification in health and safety, stroke health and wellbeing, stroke occupational health is what I'd want to see.
Thank you, Anne. That's very interesting. Jag, a question that I'm sure many people want the answer to, and I'm not sure if you're able to answer this, but what is the average compensation paid to anyone who's sued an employer for occupational stress?
How long's a piece of string, I would say.
Absolutely, yes.
Very much depends. On the bottom end of the scale, again, it very much depends on the actual psychiatric injury that one has sustained as a result of, there being a breach of duty. And that depends on medical evidence, and someone like Neil would be able to help with causation and the extent of any psychiatric symptoms. It depends ultimately on a final prognosis and whether or not that individual will be able to continue working in some shape or form and what treatment is required. But a broad brush could be anywhere between a few £1,000 upwards between up to £500,000. It very much depends on the individual, the age of the individual, the career prospects, the career trajectory, what they were earning at the time, and how long they are going to be off from work. So it ultimately depends. And I would say the younger, the more ambitious the individual, and the longer they've been affected by stress and any psychiatric injury, the more expensive the claim is going to be. However, it's often the costs that outweigh what the value of the claim is. What I would, as a warning shot to employers out there, the costs associated with advising and defending cases for occupational stress injury are grossly disproportionate. Not just legal costs, but also costs to the business. Because where you have an employee, you often have HR involvement. So you need resources from HR, line managers. I, for one, have to interview line managers. So, right, what was said and when? Because often this, you might have a very scant personnel file, and you have letters of claim that are pages long on various allegations. So I have to forensically go through all the allegations and cross off each point. And coupled with that is reviewing a personnel file. And often with these sorts of cases, there's going to be complex causation issues, which requires a review of the patient's, the claimant's personal medical records. And often, again, there might be underlying mental health problems where you have to review the medical records and assess exactly what's gone on and whether the employer is in breach. So the legal costs associated will often outweigh what the amount of claim is worth, which is why, again, I'll go back to the point of prevention is better than cure. If we are able to take reasonable steps now, and the cost effective technology is there to help employers, systems can be put in place to best protect employers with regards to these sorts of claims, but ultimately the employee's well-being. So I hope that helps.
Yes. Can I just jump in very briefly? Just having done lots of expert reports on these sorts of claims, one of the things I think is important if people are thinking about claims is that mental ill health, frank mental ill health, causes functional impairment. So those are people. Quite often, what you have is you have people who are understandably really aggrieved and upset, who make claims, but actually they're not functionally impaired. They've been promoted. They've got to go on holidays. They go and do their exercise. A member of a club. So if you haven't got significant functional impairment, you probably haven't got a mental health problem. It's worth thinking about that to make sure that claims of grievance aren't somehow translated into mental health claims.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very insightful piece of information. We'd like to go on for hours, and we have a list of questions as long as my arm, but unfortunately, we don't have the time allowed to do that. So I'll pass back to you, Jag, to conclude.
Yeah, we are out of time. That's gone. Thank you, Harry. That's gone really quickly. I'm afraid, everyone, that comes to the end of our webinar today, the allocated time. I just want to thank everyone for joining, but most of all, I want to thank our expert panel once again, who have given their valuable time to be part of this webinar from Mills and Reeve. I hope this has raised awareness of the issues, and I hope employers can recognise that there are steps now that can be taken to best protect the organisations and the well-being of the workforce. If there are any follow-up questions following this, you can contact me. I believe you have my details, but if you've got any questions for the panel, please do send those through and we can forward those on. But once again, thank you for everyone for joining in today, and I hope this has been used to everyone and everyone goes away more informed and knows what steps can be taken. Thank you.